Good afternoon, ladies, or should I say queens. I am so excited that all of you are here. You don't know how much excited I am. The level and the caliber of the women that are participating in this roundtable shows how serious they are on the issues of transformation and the empowerment of women, because you are all very busy. We know that you are busy. Some of you are operating not just in South Africa, internationally also, but you made some time to be here. Thank you so much. Honorable Minister in the Presidency, responsible for women, youth, and persons with disabilities, Maite Nkoane-Mashabane. Esteemed panelists, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Greetings to all and welcome. And I welcome you to this very important panel discussion on financial inclusion for women, youth, and persons with disabilities in the energy sector, especially renewable energy, and across the value chains thereof. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to start by outlining the role of the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, which is anchored on working towards leading and regulating programs that will transform the economy of South Africa to serve its people by contributing to various priorities, both internationally and locally. In so saying, the department seeks to ensure that women, youth, and persons with disabilities. I know the listeners or those that are viewing will ask themselves, I keep saying women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Yes, our department, its mandate is women, youth, and persons with disabilities. So that is what, or that is those are the sectors that we want to ensure that they participate, they contribute, but they benefit from these sectors. We want to ensure that they are placed at the center of the country's development programs. Our response to inequality, both income inequality and wealth inequality, is premised on the basis that inclusive programs must be geared towards rectifying gender imbalances of the past, closing gaps on representation of women, youth, and persons with disabilities, breaking stereotypes, and dismantling structural drivers of inequality that conform to benefiting a select group of privileged individuals. More specifically, in the South African context, financial inclusion can play and should play a huge role in the development of the country's economy, as well as the direct and indirect social factors that pertain to this. In this, the need arises to determine empirically to what extent this is occurring in South Africa, given the direct and indirect impact this has on women across the national, provincial, and local spectrum. Black women are the largest self-employed groups of the population, with a vast majority, however, still running informal businesses and some being unemployed. In order to increase the financial inclusion of women, strategies, in order to increase the financial inclusion of women, strategies need to be developed to address barriers that lock them out, specifically within the energy sector value chain. The demand side barriers that women face include, among others, male signatures for women and account or credit, borrower property, access to collateral. Women lack access to networks which are largely male-dominated, less financial literacy, domestic responsibilities, limits on women mobility, but also gender-based violence and femicide. Supply side barriers, financial institutions lack technical know-how to design products that suit the needs of women clients. Government and financial sector policies, unintended consequences. For example, they create red tape. The strong link between legal frameworks for secure transaction and secured registry. Small number of women are represented in board appointments. As we deliberate today, we should identify and discuss sector-wide opportunities with the complement of technically strategic areas for implementable interventions in support of women, youth, and persons with disabilities economic empowerment and participation by developing interventions that will provide a range of services that assist SMMEs, particularly enterprises in the second economy, as defined broadly, and refers to enterprises that are marginalized to all or most of the following: access to funds, access to the markets, limited business skills, limited technical know-how, and access to appropriately technology. It is with this understanding that we emphasize the importance of ensuring that implementing departments and their agencies, civil society as well as the private sector, develop innovative programs that are integrated in their approach to achieve a broader mainstreaming of empowerment and participation. To also explore the posture of the asset management sector to support women, youth, and persons with disabilities in the energy. In the context of economic empowerment and financial inclusion, women constantly face multiple obstacles in the judicial, economic, and political, and in social systems, which are now being exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. The year 2022 does indeed present an unamicable opportunity to mobilize action to transform and restructure our economy to meet the desires of our most vulnerable. Through the Pillar 5 of the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, which focuses on economic power, we have to ensure that women are incorporated in every aspect of economic empowerment. Broad principles that should and would be adopted by government departments to transform and economic inclusion agenda is realized include ensuring that economic recovery plans, strategies, and interventions for the respective industries are explicit in terms of representation of women. Targets are set per industry and sector master plans for women economic empowerment in order to respond to inclusive economic participation. Ownership, access to resources, and wage equality, and ensuring the implementation of 40% set aside for preferential procurement is being implemented by all government departments to ensure that women, youth, and persons with disabilities benefit. Therefore, we need to take a proactive approach and commit to increased representation across all sectors. The collation of impact data, tracking, monitoring, and evaluation, progress towards an empowerment and participation in key decision-making and leadership positions, whilst building strong stakeholder networks from which to collaborate on regarding common country goals. I am extremely excited today because we have a panelist comprising of representatives from the financial sector, as well as those in the sector. Through this panel discussion, panelists will articulate the challenges that women face to access finances to fund high capital intensive projects in the energy sector. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to join the discussion and participate in the panel discussion, which will be moderated by a highly accomplished and experienced entrepreneur and private equity investor, Ms. Paulo, who's an accountant by profession. She's the chairperson and founder of the IDF Capital South Africa. She's the president of the Association of Black Securities and Investment Professionals in South Africa. She has a long list of accolades. She's a public speaker. She's many things that are in the website. We have the panelist profiles in the website. Those that want to know more about her details are in the website. I will request you to go and look there. Thank you very much. Without wasting time, I would like to invite the Minister to deliver the keynote address. Minister for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. She is Minister in the Presidency for Women, Youth and Persons with Disabilities. Over to you, Minister.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Today marks the second session of the 3 panel discussions focusing on renewable energy and gender. The session will be focusing on the key policy area of financial inclusion for women, youth, and persons with disabilities in the energy sector and across its own value chains. And as today, the discussions focuses on promoting economic transformation in the energy sector, I'm excited by the wealth of professional experience and of the panelists that have been brought into this session. They represent a diverse mix of financial institutions with expertise in their field of work. This discussion is important as it provides a platform for the financial sector to provide their perspectives on the access to multiple liquidity pools for women, youth, and persons with disabilities. It will also allow the opportunity to explore the posture of asset management sector to support women, youth, and persons with disabilities in energy. Distinguished guests, in our deliberations today, we should identify and discuss sector-wide strategies and opportunities for implementing interventions in support of economic empowerment and participation in these 3 targeted groups. It is upon us as activists, experts, policymakers, and administrators to determine the change we want to see. We should seek transformation and increased participation of smaller enterprises, including women in this sector. As this country engages in the just transition to a greater and greener economy, we should ensure that women-owned enterprises are supported to participate in this environmentally friendly economy. It is in this context that we emphasize that all relevant stakeholders develop innovative programs that are integrated in their approach. It is imperative for achieving a broader mainstreaming of empowerment and participation of gender, age, and disability in sustainable way. Ladies and gentlemen, gender-responsive budgeting must be a target with financial institutions targeting on supporting upcoming stakeholders in the sector. Government, together with identified social partners, will need to build a locally based critical mass of businesses to achieve a transformed economy that is inclusive and responsive to the need of women, youth, and persons with disabilities. Therefore, we must actively promote and accelerate increased access to financial resources and services. The ownership and control of this critical productive levers are key components needed to empower and mainstream marginalized groups. This will ensure increased bargaining power within our productive markets. It will further foster attitudinal and behavioral changes within government and the private sector and society as a whole. The importance of financial inclusion cannot be underscored enough. It requires collective efforts as we are to ensure that the relevant non-financial support needed by these target groups is embedded and prioritized by all sectors of the economy. This is vitally important to truly catalyze the important role of young women and persons with disabilities across sectors and value chains. The clear objective is to inform the entire value chain of our productive sector to give meaning and impetus to the aspirations of the transformation. Program Director, sustainability is important. Inequality is not sustainable. Growing our markets in a developmental trajectory will require investment and training, resourcing, and supporting new players in the market. We must be alive to the country's efforts in economic reconstruction and recovery. This means the opportunities should be made available by way of modernizing, reforming network industries associated with state-owned enterprises, reorientating trade policies, pursuing a greater regional and interprovincial integration, boosting exports, employment, and innovative job creation, international lowering of barriers to entry for business to start, grow, and compete. Supporting labor-intensive sector and addressing economic concentration, boosting education and skills development, promoting and beneficiation of our own raw materials, and addressing racial, gender, and geographic inequalities, which hamper the deeper economic growth and development. Therefore, we need to take a proactive approach and commit to increased representation across all sectors. We need the collation of the impact data for tracking, monitoring, and evaluating progress towards empowerment and participation in key decision-making and leadership positions. We must build strong stakeholder networks to collaborate towards common country goals. To achieve financial inclusion, this roundtable would need to consider dynamic and innovative thinking. In conclusion, Program Director, I therefore call upon all financial institutions and funders in the energy sector to design financial solutions for the economically underprivileged people of our nation, majority of whom are women. It is only when we work together can we move towards achieving Agenda 2030, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and the 2030 goal for gender equality for all women and girls. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister, for the keynote address. All of us have heard the keynote address, and we together are committed with you to ensure that women, youth, and persons with disabilities are integrated in the entire program of development within the renewable energy sector and the energy sector in broad. And we are saying also together with the DFIs and the banks that are participating here, we will all work together to ensure that everyone in South Africa participates and everyone is empowered, because the GDP of the country is evaluated through individuals. So all of us as individuals in South Africa have to be empowered to ensure that our GDP grows. Thank you very much, Minister. Again, without wasting time, I would like to hand over to the moderator, Ms. Polo Litika Khadebe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, DG, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, those who are with us on the panel and those who will be joining us virtually. I will not introduce myself because I think the DG has done a good job, but I would really like to welcome this esteemed panel of speakers today, from your commercial banking space to your DFI space to your infrastructure space, both locally in South Africa as well as spreading across the continent. I would like to welcome Ms. Nkoane-Mashabane, who is an energy specialist at the Public Investment Corporation of South Africa, which is actually the largest asset manager on the continent. Our second panelist, Ms. Zama Kangile, who is the divisional executive for Ventures, Capital and Corporate Finance at the National Empowerment Fund in South Africa. And our third panelist is Ms. Chilizi Makari, who's a senior deal maker in the Energy SBU at the Industrial Development Corporation of South Africa, which luckily also has a Sub-Saharan Africa mandate similar to the PIC. And last but not least, we also have, not last but not least, we have Ms. Punki Modise, who is the interim group financial director of ABSA, which has got branches across the African continent. So hopefully we can also take the conversation beyond just the borders of South Africa. And then the last but not least panelist is Ms. Tsitsi Musasike, who is in charge of origination and client coverage within the energy, environment and ICT for the Development Bank of Southern Africa, which also has a Southern Africa mandate. And I think it is important that the people that are around the table are not just confined in their mandate to South Africa, but actually to the continent, because in this day and age where we are talking about the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that is meant to firstly lead to interregional trade amongst the various African continent countries, 54 of them, and in the process, of course, open up opportunities of growth, significant growth for both local as well as our colleagues across the rest of the African continent. So I think it is important that as we talk about financial inclusion for women, youth, and people with disabilities in South Africa, we actually start appreciating that, in fact, it's a broader continental conversation and not just confined to South Africa. So I welcome you all, and I really look forward to hearing some of your observations and some of the, I suppose, the initiatives that you have had to start embarking upon as we try to be a little bit more intentional in our work around inclusion of this grouping of people being women, youth, and people with disabilities. And the one thing that I just want to comment on is, when it comes to South Africa, at least, we are not short of a policy framework that enables the inclusion of women, youth, and people with disabilities. I think, if anything, South Africa has been a pioneer for many years when it comes to, being very clear around its policy objectives So we cannot say that our government officials and politicians have not provided clear leadership in that regard. What we seem to be lacking, though, is institutions like ourselves around the table, who are supposed to be the implementing agencies. We continue to see a very big gap between what we espouse in our policy objectives as articulated and espoused in a legal framework versus what actually translates onto the ground. And being a practitioner myself in the space and having been investing in with a very clear gender lens investing strategy for some time now, I've come to appreciate the importance of intentionality around mainstreaming, your previously marginalized people as part of your investment decision-making process. And we've seen the results of how you actually can, with intentionality, yield the intended outcomes. And then I'm really keen to hear from colleagues around the table how they are intentional, or how they've been intentional, or maybe what their challenges have been around intentionality around that. But I think importantly, statistics say that although on the African continent, in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, women by far make up a significant portion of entrepreneurs. The DG spoke about in South Africa, Black women in particular, being in the most in terms of a number of entrepreneurs. But when you look at what kind of support, financial and otherwise, that goes towards women entrepreneurs, until today, less than 2% of financing goes to women entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think it's quite telling, that after all these years, we're still not able to drive sufficient capital to women entrepreneurs. And then the question is, what needs to be true? Studies have been done, in particular by McKinsey, where it has been proven that when you support women, especially where there's diversity in companies at certain levels, in management levels, executive management levels, and you have got a minimum level of women representation in those levels, it goes straight to the bottom line. So there's a commercial case. So it's not just anecdotal evidence that shows that it makes business sense to include women. So why is it that we are still struggling to see that inclusion? What needs to be true for the PIC, for APSA, for the IDC, for the NEF, for the DBSA, to really say, well, women make up 51% of the world population, and therefore 51% of everything that we do goes towards the support of women, especially because it has been proven that it can lift us out of the economic challenges we face as a country and as a continent, as Africa. And I think perhaps as a last shot, in the work that has been done by the African Development Bank, where they talk about their high fives, in the work that the African Continental Free Trade Agreement has done in terms of coming up with a framework and having a very clear strategy informed by the African Union, rather, I think it's a 2063 strategy, if I remember well. Women have been put right at the center of those policy initiatives, of those documents, of those high fives, of those flagship projects. And in particular, what the African Development Bank says in its high fives is that we have to power Africa if we're going to achieve interregional trade. And it goes further to talk about the importance of renewable energy and being very intentional about the inclusion of these marginalized groupings that the DG has just touched on. So with those comments, ladies, I would really like to invite each one of you, and I'll start with Lungile from the PIC, Ms. Nkoane-Mashabane, to just share with us from your perspective, being an energy specialist, where are we, what needs to happen, and what do you think maybe, and I don't want it to take too long, what do you think as a country or the institution that you work for, we need to be thinking about at this point? And if you can just do it in 5 minutes, Lungile, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Nkoane-Mashabane, as I've been introduced, from the Public Investment Corporation. I am the Energy and Infrastructure Specialist. As Polo had already indicated, the PIC is the largest asset manager in Africa, and we have just over 2.3 trillion under investment. Now, Polo, I like what you said about intentionality, because our policy as the PIC on women, youth, and people living with disabilities has always been included in our Transformation BE charters, but we've realized over time that it has fallen short. And especially when we have conversations such as these, it becomes very apparent that we're not doing enough. And it all boils down to intentionality. We've always used the BEE guidelines, and these talk about how to get Black participants to buy shares, how to get Black participants to invest in infrastructure projects, and we've always thought that it's broad-based enough, and it is inclusive of these designated groups: women, youth, people living with disabilities. However, looking at our investments, looking at our portfolio, we realize that we have fallen short of what we would have liked to have achieved. And the truth of the matter is that if you do not measure output, or you do not measure what you'd like to achieve, it's not going to get monitored. And we realized this like last year, and this was why we sat down, and we're currently working on our transformation charter, linking up obviously with the BE charter. And our transformation charter will be looking at obviously the ownership. We'll be looking at, this is now Black ownership, looking at Black shareholding, but we're going to be very intentional now, looking at youth and putting it as a target in our investments, looking at women-owned as well as people living with disabilities as well. And, looking at our transformation charter, one of the key things coming out is that we will only invest in transactions that are transformed, or that when we enter as the PIC, we will transform them ourselves. We will be looking at entities that have a minimum level 4 BE score, for instance. So we have a multitude of things that we're looking at, and we're trying to change and be intentional about what we want to achieve. Lastly, when we speak about energy, at the PIC, energy comprises only 6% of our portfolio, and this is not good enough for us. We would like in the next five years to actually double that, and it is going to be intentional, looking at our energy portfolio, looking at women, looking at youth, people living with disabilities. It will come out from our transformation charter that we're currently working on. It will come out in our deals. It will come out even in our funds. And even when we speak to the public, speak to fund managers, very intentional about what we want to achieve. I will not go into the projects that we have been working on. I will leave that for a bit later. But ultimately, it boils down to what do you want to achieve as the PIC, and how intentional are we about this sector? And I can tell you that we are very committed to this designated group. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot for that, Lungile. So it has raised like 100 questions in my head, and I'm very tempted to ask them, but I will not do that at this point. But maybe just to give you something to think about but park it. We've said that you are the largest asset manager on the African continent, and energy being one of 5 high fives to unlock the potential of this continent cannot be 6%. And I'd like you to think about what the role of the PIC is in unlocking the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement in particular, because it's so critical. That's number one. I think number two, the PIC, and I know this for a fact, is very big on ESG, Lungile. And we have moved as the world towards gender inclusion, for instance, to talk about gender lens investing. And I know for a fact that the IDC today has not been one of the large DFIs in the world that has adopted the 2X challenge, which talks about gender lens investing. So when we talk about intentionality, and there are already frameworks and benchmarks that are being utilized in the world, the PIC being a leading institution, I suspect needs to seem to be doing more than what we are seeing. So I'm going to park those two, and I'll come back to them later on if you'll allow me. And I will move on to Zama Kanyile, Ms. Zama Kanyile, who's the divisional executive at the NEF. Now, Zama, the NEF, of course, its primary mandate is to back previously disadvantaged South Africans, or to be more precise, Black South Africans. And I know that over time, the NEF has also sought to ensure that there's proper gender diversity in the work that it does. And I know that even youth has been quite an important area of focus. I do not know the extent to which people with disabilities has, and you can also touch on that. But despite these stated intentions, and I know a lot of effort behind this, Zama, what have you seen? What is the NEF reflective of the demographics of this country? What are the impediments if you're not there to get in there? And based on your observations, how are you guys starting to think around closing that gap to make sure that there's gender diversity in the work that you do? And again, if you can just keep it to 5 minutes, that would be really great. Thank you.
Thank you, facilitator, and greetings to my esteemed panel members, to the Honorable Minister and DE or DG for the opening remarks that have really centered the purpose of today's discussion. I think, facilitator, you have adequately captured the essence of the NEF, whose mandate is to grow broad-based Black economic empowerment. And that is what the NEF is seized with. So with the little that the NEF has been receiving from government, we've been able to make significant strides with over 11.9 billion rand approved for Black-owned businesses. We've paid out 7.7 billion, but whilst these numbers perhaps pale in comparison to the numbers that my colleagues on the rest of the panel would be dealing with, what's good to report is the repayment period. And we're debunking the first myth about supporting Black people, Black women, people with disabilities, because of that 7.7 billion that we paid out, we've actually repaid 4 billion. What that has done is that it has enabled us to recycle money from our investments to support even more businesses. So given our balance sheet size, we then, play in the SME sector. In terms of intentionality, and I like what the speaker before me and yourself, facilitator, have mentioned about being intentional. So we did a study around 2013, 2014, just scanning the markets and assessing where women were vis-a-vis what we know to be the proportion of females to males in the greater South African population. And we were very disappointed to note that at best in some sectors we're sitting at 25% at that, and we had low participation in the single digits in most other sectors. So to counter that, the NEF established what we call the Women Empowerment Fund. So this means that of our annual allocation, we actually have a set aside of a budget for majority Black women-owned businesses. So we're looking at businesses that are 51% or more Black women-owned that are also managed by these Black women, because we don't want passive shareholding in terms of investment holdings companies, but we see true inclusivity being achieved through having operational involvement. And so how do we crowd in other designated groups like youth and people with disabilities? We look to then see the actual structure of management, and we participate in the acquisition space where we do transformative transactions. We finance businesses looking to change the hands of ownership from white to more broad-based Black ownership. And so our starting point, because the opening remarks touched on some of the challenges being lack of technical knowledge and experience, is to see what are some of the quick wins that we can implement via things like succession planning and skills development plans that we want to see being implemented during the tenure of our investments in the various businesses. So through this intentional act of the NEF, we've set aside a bold target to say for every rand that we pay out, actually 40 cents of that must be for the benefit of women. And we've been able to achieve 37%. We're not where we'd like to be, but we look to gradually grow that up to 50% over time.
Thank you so much, Zama. And I think what you are saying is touching what Lungile said, that what gets measured gets done. You gave yourselves a target, and you may say you're not quite there yet, but you're significantly towards that. And I think it really underlines the importance of intentionality. And I think, DG, if anything you take out of this discussion today, it has to be the importance of intentionality, moving from what the policy says, but being very deliberate and intentional about putting it on the ground. So thank you very much, Zama, for that. I would like to invite Chilizi Makari from the IDC. Now, Chilizi, the IDC has got a sub-Saharan Africa investment mandate. And I imagine that, a very similar question to you that I would have had for the PIC to say, in light of the importance of energy in unlocking and lighting up Africa so that we can integrate regionally, and the central role that women are expected to play in that regard, how is the IDC, thinking about, firstly facilitating the ability for women in energy to participate, right? The IDC has been for some years now, actually, quite active in financing energy projects, renewable energy projects. So it would be interesting to understand what your department or your business unit at the IDC, almost at the DTI, and the IDC has been doing to ensure the mainstreaming and therefore financial inclusion of women, youth, and people with disabilities. But maybe share with us also what has worked, what are the impediments have been, and how are you guys thinking about better inclusion going forward? Again, 5 minutes, and we can always come back to this later on if you want to elaborate. Thank you very much, Chilizi.
Thanks, Polo, and greetings to my fellow panelists. So your question is quite broad, and so I think what I'll do is to provide the context around the space that we play in. So we've been set up, the Energy Business Unit at the IDC has been set up to contribute towards South Africa's just energy transition and to improve the security of energy supply in the country. So in terms of regional participation or funding across the region, our intention is to reduce dependency on the power provided by South Africa to the other countries so that, we reduce our own power outages. But how do we do this? So we do this by funding IPPs to build renewable energy projects. And so we play in the utility scale space as well as the commercial and industrial space. So what have been my observations? These projects, the IPPs, are usually large multinationals, foreign multinationals. So the first problem that we're having is how do we bring South Africans into these projects? So what we're looking at is we're supporting the government in the metrics that they put in, the parameters that, when a foreign IPP comes into a project, there should be South African ownership. So we look at funding South African ownership. Within that, we look at funding transformation in that ownership. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build South African owned IPPs so that the benefits accrue to South Africa. So second observation I've made is that this is very much a boys' club and a white boys' club. If there's going to be any Black participation, it's going to be usually the same players, the same BEE parties, and also one or two guys in the ownership structure of the BEE party. So it's not really very broad-based. But what you do have is the government bringing in the element of community trusts. That the cash flows that come in from, so the community trust will have ownership in the projects, and the cash flows that come into the community trust from the projects are then used to fund women-run programs on the ground. But I do find that this is still very much inadequate, because these sort of projects are by invitation, and you're going to invite people that you know. You're going to be inviting people that are in your network. How do you bring women into your network? So for me, what I've seen as something that's very interesting is IDC is the largest investor in the Alithia IDF fund, although that you are invested in. And it is a gender lens investing fund that looks at funding women-owned, women-led, and women-serving businesses. So this is where, if you're struggling to find women at an ownership level, you can look at funding businesses that have women, majority women in senior positions, executive positions, or majority female employees, or women in the supply chain or the value chain of the renewable energy sector, or businesses that provide benefit or are provide goods and services that are consumed by women. So with that, I do find that at some point you're going to be interacting with women, or you are creating possibilities for yourself, or opportunities to interact with women somewhere along that process. And tomorrow, you're going to have a woman top of mind to say, you know what, I met this lady who was running this business that is supplying something along the value chain, and I can invite her along to participate in a project. And I think that is the model that funders should be looking at going forward, instead of limiting it to ownership and operational involvement at IPP and EPC level, because that's quite high up there. How do we get the women to travel the whole value chain to get to that point? Because as I mentioned at the beginning in my opening, this is a boys' club. It's by invitation. How do we bring the women into the conversation where they get invited? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Chilizi. I mean, it's almost infusing women across the whole value chain, DG, where we are saying that we need to open up the conversation around the inclusion of women, and make sure that where the barriers to entry are high, as Chilizi has clearly demonstrated, we then don't get left out because it's too big and it's too technical, it's too specialized, we don't have the money. Almost break, they talk about breaking the bulk in procurement, almost break the bulk of the opportunity into smaller components and see how women participate anywhere along that value chain. And that's how we can integrate women very intentionally in the economic opportunities that we are faced with. So the IDC, they're leading the way around gender lens investing. Thanks for that, Chilizi. I will invite Punki Modise. Punki, your organization plays a very important role when it comes to financing energy projects, infrastructure projects across the continent. And I know that you have been playing in particular a leading role when it comes to issues around climate change. And energy, of course, is a key component of that conversation. So if you will, Punki, maybe just take us through, how you as ABSA are seeing the opportunity, bearing in mind some of the background that I provided earlier around what needs to be true in order for this continent to actually achieve its economic potential. So what are you as ABSA seeing? What are the opportunities you're seeing? Are you finding women that you can back, whether it's women as entrepreneurs or women as professionals or whatever way? And maybe, again, we can leave it at that high level. And you're more than welcome to also start thinking about some of the suggestions that you think we should take away from this as things that we can recommend and so we can implement going forward. But I'd like to give you an opportunity to just give us a 5-minute, this is how you see things and this is how you're thinking about things. Thanks a lot, Punki.
Yeah, thanks. And I think from my side also, thanks for having me, as well as my fellow panelists. I think just maybe to draw on your earlier reflections, you spoke to us about the McKinsey study that was done. So if you look at that study, I think it was clear in terms of saying that, gender inequality is not only a pressing, issue, but it's both a moral as well as a social issue. And at the same time, I think what that study spoke to is the fact that, it is critical for, us to be all encompassing, especially from a gender point of view, because when you look at that study, it was quite clear that, advancing women's equality can add up to about 12 trillion, to the global growth, across the board. So I thought that context that you've set for us was quite critical. However, as we know, the world is transitioning, to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. And at the center of that is energy. I think energy is central to human well-being as well as to the economic development. And then at the same time, it is a key enabler, I think, to create, a just and an inclusive as well as sustainable society that we all, broadly aspire to. So in my view, achieving, I think, this goal is going to require all of us, to your earlier point, to really start coordinating in a much more deliberate fashion. I think you spoke a lot about intentionality, and I certainly agree with you. Intentionality is going to be key, I think, as we go forward. And then I think, in my view, is achieving this goal is going to require, obviously, everybody, to participate and to engage meaningfully, in this conversation. It is therefore, I think, fitting that we share, insights and brainstorm on solutions that can help all of us to attain a much more healthier and equitable society, where I think within that we protect as well as prioritize, and also afford women opportunities, as well as people living with disabilities and the youth, to be quite honest, opportunities to really participate in this $12 trillion opportunity that everybody speaks to. So I think maybe during the conversation, to your earlier point, Pulu, is I will touch on some of the initiatives that ABSA is looking into in terms of just advancing the women agenda. And I can comfortably tell you that, in the boardroom, this is a center, conversation. ESG, I think, sits at the center of everything we do. And I think within that, we are quite clear to say we've got to see women playing a meaningful role as we go forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Punki. And I think what is very important, when you said 12 trillion, I almost interjected you because I wanted you to be very clear that is 12 trillion US dollars, not rand. That can be unlocked into the global economy. So I think it's something to really think about and reflect on. But I really like your emphasis on collaboration. They say collaboration is the new gold or something like that. I can't remember what they say, the new something, but it's almost like without collaboration, we will die as individual players in this space. And I think that for me, that becomes one of the key takeaways from this conversation, Gigi, to say, how do we create a platform and a space where we can come in, as Punki says, share insights, brainstorm around solutions, because the challenges we face, are our collective challenges. They are not specific to any one institution. And I do believe that if we collaborate, we will have a much better chance of actually unlocking the potential that we see. So for me, that's really quite an important takeaway. And Titi, we have been saving the best for last. So GBSA, for me, a very important player. Again, in the conversation, I'm very obsessed about the opportunity that the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. I'm sure you've picked it up. I've mentioned it at least 5 times so far. And I think that your organization plays a very, very critical role in unlocking that, particularly in the Southern African development community. And again, I think, integration, making infrastructure work, making it easy for us to move from one point to the other is what you do. I'm assuming this is your bread and butter, but it's also one of the 5 high fives from the FDB that says if you don't get that right, we might as well forget about achieving the goals of creating a 3.4 trillion African economy, because that's what they're saying the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, if done well, can unlock for all of us around this table. So how do we make sure that women do not get left behind at CC? And I'm sure you, being the woman that you are leading this conversation at the DBSA and making sure that as you allocate capital, you are putting women at the center of it. So please share with us how you see things from your perspective.
Thank you very much, panel moderator. A very good afternoon to the Honorable Minister, to the DG, and to fellow panelists. Thank you very much for inviting the DBSA to participate in this very important discussion. Indeed, we all acknowledge that there are challenges that are facing women, youth, persons, and persons with disabilities. That's why we're here this afternoon to get to the solutions, around how to address this. Yes, at the DBSA, we are aware that these challenges exist. And we are aware that gender mainstreaming, addressing youths, addressing persons with disabilities is a key element of the business that we should be writing going forward. So often, so I'm sure most of you would be aware that the DBSA has played a key role in the renewable energy IPP program. We now into round 5, going into round 6 shortly. There has also been the risk mitigation IPP program, where again we've played a key role. So in all these programs, we understand, given today's discussion, that indeed, as financial institutions, we have not done enough to include women or the right levels of women participation, youth participation, and participation of youth with disabilities. So more often than not, we look at the financial institutions because they are the ones that make the funds flow. But having said that, I want also to add that policy is key. Under the renewable energy IPP programs, there is an element of BEE participation. Under the renewable energy, the risk mitigation IPP program, there was a 5% Black women-owned ownership participation in the project company. My own observation is that in these programs, the focus around youths, persons with disabilities, and I guess to a certain extent, women participation at the project company has not been highlighted to the level that we're trying to achieve this afternoon. So yes, policy is very important. We need to, going forward, ensure that participation of women, youth, and persons with disabilities at the project company ownership level is factored in the bid requirements. It is a must to have in the bid requirements. It's not a nice to have. It is a must to have in the bid requirements. So, going forward, again, round 6 is coming up. We need to ensure, not only, I guess, in the energy sector, in all other sectors across government, that participation of women, youth, persons with disabilities is highlighted and is given the right allocation of ownership on these projects. So I think for now, I'll leave it at that, but happy to engage further on how we can assist as DBSA. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. And indeed, I think the DBSA has been leading the charge when it comes to some of these IPP programs. I remember right from the get-go, together with the IDC. So as I'm thinking about the conversation that has taken place now, what strikes me quite a bit is that we're not speaking a lot about not just being intentional, for instance, around making sure that the bid requirements are very specific, that we want women, youth, and people with disabilities to be included, because typically then that leads us to believe that as we want them to be included as owners. The reality is that with the short supply of people coming with STEM results, or rather subjects from high school, the throughput of engineers and people with the technical skills on the other end of the pipeline development is very, very thin. And DG, I'm wondering whether this conversation should not just be confined to the provision of the financial resources, which is very, very critical actually to unlock the opportunities. But intentionality also has to go beyond that to say, how do we go to primary schools and create awareness around STEM subjects? How do we go to high schools and create awareness so that we can then start seeing that throughput going to university? Because the challenge we face as a country is also a pipeline challenge, and I think we should not run away from that. So I just thought I should, sort of raise that, because it's just an observation that one makes as one thinks about these things. I would like to go back though to Lungile to say that I challenged you earlier to say the PIC is the largest asset manager on the African continent. The world has adopted gender lens investing. If we are to be serious about intentionality, you look at the PIC, who will not give you a single cent if you're not able to demonstrate what your ESG policy is, what you've actually been able to impact on that. And those of us who are advocates of gender lens investing have been saying, until gender lens investing takes as central a role as ESG in the investment decision-making process of a PIC or similar, then it means we are just paying lip service to this. And the world over, all investors are starting to assume that. So for me, my challenge is, why is it that the PIC is moving so slowly in terms of considering adopting gender lens investing as an example?
Thank you very much. So you are absolutely right in that we have a very large ESG team. And I think one of the largest, in fact, when you consider other lenders. And the reason for that is because increasingly, because we lend money on behalf of other people, such as your GPF and your UIF, increasingly they're becoming very pedantic about certain issues, and rightfully so, around environmental issues, governance issues, ethics, and especially around women and Black participation in the economy. And this is why, to this end, we're trying to fast track that entire process. Currently, we do have an energy fund, and we are working with a Black woman-owned entity in actually dispersing this fund. And this is one of the key initiatives that we're currently working on at the moment. And this is not only to unlock the energy sector, but to unlock women participation as well. And what is important about this is that it's not just women, but it's Black women youth-owned as well. And it cuts across not just energy, like in terms of your IPPs, because there is that element, but also looking at the commercial industrial sectors also. You were talking about education now and what can be done and getting that throughput in. And even when we speak to these fund managers that we're looking to engage, their organograms are very important to us, understanding that are there women in the structure, not just senior, but lower down? Are there women in there? What are they doing in terms of their graduate programs? What are they doing in terms of throughput also? Looking at, and I lecture as well. And I can tell you, we do not have a shortage of Black women specifically in classrooms. They're there, they pass, they excel, they do very, very well. It's when we get to industry that all of a sudden there seems to be some blockage. So this is not even about higher education or rather institutions of higher education. They've done their part, but it's also up to corporates and saying, what are they doing? I mean, PIC, for instance, have their graduate program, and they're making sure that there is throughput coming in. And the question then becomes is, in 5-10 years' time, is that throughput going to be represented at senior levels? But more importantly, is that throughput going to be represented in the energy sector where we desperately need people? I think you're on mute there.
apologies. So no, I was going to say thank you for that. So the question I have, which maybe is a follow-on, is the issue of throughput, though, or rather the issue of pipeline is pervasive. If you look at the technology sector, for instance, and I invest a lot in the technology space, we struggle to find women. And we have done a study that shows it is the throughput, it's the pipeline that we need to be really looking at and be very intentional about. So the question then becomes, if you are saying that there's no shortage of girls or young people or people with disabilities in our classes that are doing maths and science, how come it is that when we are saying we're looking for entrepreneurs that have got that technical skill, we don't see them coming through? And maybe that is where the conversation, DG, needs to also start taking place, because if Lungile is saying, no, the input is there, the pipeline is there, the reason why the throughput is not what it should be is because there's almost like a crack along the pipeline, a valley of death, if you will, where people fall into. Then we need to really be zooming into what creates that valley of death that then deprives us of the benefit of the pipeline that you are saying that we are seeing. And I think it is important for us to really reflect on that. But thank you very much for that. I'm still going to come and knock at the door of the PIC very loudly and ask the PIC what are they doing around gender lens investing, and I want very specific targets. Let me move on to, but I think that the question really that we need to be thinking about a little bit more, Lungile, and today is not to show how good or bad anybody's doing, but it's to say what else should we be doing really, because clearly what we are doing is not meeting the requirements out there in the market. So maybe that's something as part of your closing remarks you might just want to come in and comment on. Zama, maybe because you have gone further ahead than most when it comes to the inclusion of women and youth and people with disabilities, it might be useful to hear from you, maybe as a recommendation. What do you think, as somebody who's, let's say I'm an IDC or whoever, and I'm trying to really think about what should I start doing tomorrow so that I can start seeing more women impacted with the work that I do. What lessons can we learn from yourselves as the NEF in terms of what has worked?
Thanks. I think it starts, Bolo, with something you mentioned earlier on, is who's actually making the decisions at the top and setting the targets. So if the leadership is actually reflective of our demographics, you'll find that the emphasis on making sure that the budgeting does have a gender lens and is inclusive of youth and people with disabilities, that you will do better in that respect. I think you start by setting a target and a roadmap as to how you're going to edge closer to the desired place. But it also speaks to being mindful of the challenges and being responsive to the challenges that actually keep people out. So, Chiliti mentioned something important about the doors are closed. So how do you even get women and youth and people with disabilities invited in the first place? So is to use our powers really as the development funding institutions, where we do have the power of the buck, and we can use conditionalities attached to our funding and ring fence, certain shareholding for these designated groups to be offloaded to at a later stage. An example of this is that, when we talk about the energy sector, and Ms. Makari mentioned, independent power producers. Whilst an organization like the NEF may not have the balance sheets to fund the commercialization of such an initiative, we know that our place is perhaps in the feasibility studies. So when these ideas come in terms of green energy and renewable energy, how do we support the development of these ideas? Because feasibility studies cost in the range of millions. And we know that the groups that we're talking about today do not have anything close to that capital. So it's availing that pot of funds to develop and really play at that early stage, because by the time you talk a financial close or commercialization of these initiatives, it's too far down the line, it's too expensive to buy in. But I think grassroots level, what are the challenges? And DG touched on these. The lack of entrepreneurial ability, So let's set aside certain funds for actual non-financial support. And when we do then set aside funds to support and stimulate the economy, like the Black Industrialist Fund, let's not stop at saying this is a target for Black industrialists, but These are the women-led businesses that we want to see under this scheme, and this is the extent of it. And we're holding all of you DFIs that we work in partnership with accountable, and you must tell us, where are you with your youth-led Black industrialist businesses, and where are people with disabilities being included in your transactions? So I think it's about accountability, after intentionality, but it's also about better collaboration and coordination. There's pockets of excellence as one listens to the conversation that's been ensuing. So we need more collaborative efforts, and I think the ministry led by Ms. Maite Nkoane-Mashabane is actually well placed to be the one coordinating this. So we want to see more initiatives like the Black women-owned business initiatives that is led through the presidency. It has UN Women involved. It has CEDA involved. The DFI is involved. It cuts across various industry players and their working groups. We need more of those coordinated plans, as we see with the other industry master plans. But more importantly, once we've got those grand structures in place, let's monitor and evaluate implementation and be responsive.
No, thank you so very much for that, Zama. The issue of representativity, which is what you're talking about when you say it depends on who's in the leadership position, cannot be overemphasized. And diversity in that leadership. So it's not just about, is it a man, is it a young person? It's actually the composite of the diversity at that level is so important. And I think that as a country, we oftentimes forget to talk about diversity in its fullness. And we tend to almost be, I will say, myopic in our approach and attitude towards these issues, which are very, very important. Because, my apologies, because we should be very careful to not assume that if it's a woman who's in charge, therefore she will take care of youth and people with disabilities. We should be very intentional about also being insistent, DG, on having youth and people with disabilities and men, because it is through diversity that we actually get the best out of all of us as a collective. So I really like what you said, Zama, and I think that, and this touches on what Tsitsi spoke about the importance of policy, and you say, having conditionality around your funding, and that's really what is your policy stance as an organization, and therefore how does it translate into your investment decision-making process, right? You can't say we've got a BEE charter as an organization, but when you contract with the rest of the economy, you throw that out and you say, well, I'm only just looking for the best price. So being tied to very clear targets and being measured on that, and I think it comes out quite strongly. But what I'm really, before I get to what really excites me about this conversation, Zama, you make reference to something that a lot of our institutions are very shy of talking about, which is the technical assistance. That is a necessary evil for developmental finance, right? And when I say we don't talk about a lot about it is because people will say, well, we're managing pensioners' money, or we're managing so-and-so's money. And in the same breath, we're saying we want to see transformation. And the reality, and this has been proven the world over, it's not even a South Africa unique thing. Almost every DFI in the world has got a technical assistance facility, which is a grant that is meant to help do capacity building for the businesses that we invest in. Because when you're in a developmental state, it is understood that you have to pay to develop. For me to get to a business that is commercially viable, I sometimes have to, provide grant funding, to do some education, to do some capacity building, so that the business looks like what it needs to look like for me when I wear my investment hat. And for me, DG, I think this is something that the department should really take on seriously, to say, shouldn't we then be looking at some form of, I think Tsitsi spoke about a risk facility of sorts, so that we can ensure the inclusion of women in IPPs. So if this department is serious about the inclusion of women, and is mindful of the challenges that women often face when they're looking to raise funding. Maybe we should then be looking at how do we help to raise the pockets of funding that will provide technical assistance or some risk mitigation assistance so that we can help women actually get to the point where they look commercially viable. Because sometimes just putting in a grant actually does make the difference between whether an opportunity is commercially viable or not. But what I'm really loving, which has come through at least 2, if not 3 times so far, is the importance of collaboration, the importance of coordination, because it is not for lack of resources or knowledge. Zama, you used the term centers of excellence. If we allow ourselves to tap into those who are good at what they do and back them financially and otherwise, we actually are able to scale those kinds of things. And that's the beauty of collaboration. And I really, really pray that we take this forward when we finish here. Chilidzi, we have spoken a lot about, we've touched on some of the challenges that you have said you've seen with the IPP projects in particular, them being old boys clubs. And I like the fact that you started bringing us into the conversation around gender lens investing. And I don't know, perhaps, whether having engaged with this concept, whether you might have some nuggets on, and to share with the other colleagues, of course, around the table to say, how do we practically infuse women in our whole investment decision-making process and not just say, oh, it doesn't have women and therefore we're good to go. But in the case where we do not have women, but there's a huge opportunity, how do we, because we are around the table with investment professionals, how do we practically infuse the consideration of women, youth, and people with disabilities as we go through each stage of the investment process?
Thanks, Polo. So renewable energy technology has been quite significantly de-risked. So I'm talking here about solar power and wind power. So a lot of funding institutions are quite happy to participate in this space. So it's quite a crowded space. So then you sit as the IDC and you ask yourself, what role can I play other than, making financial returns? What is the value that I can bring from a development perspective? So what we've done is we've tended to isolate our participation towards funding of Black individuals, women, and youth, and that is how we come into this, come into the fray, because banks are here. Commercial banks, it's quite crowded. Everybody wants to participate, especially on the senior loan side of things. But when you look at trying to facilitate participation by Black individuals, women, youth, etc., no one wants to touch that because it's looked at as, how will we get our money back? So we've kind of designed instruments. So we offer tailor-made solutions specifically geared at this group of individuals to look at how can we assist them to repay our loan outside of just the cash flow from the projects that they are investing in. So Zama spoke earlier about operational involvement. So a lot of the time you will find the entities or the BE parties or the women-owned businesses just looking for shareholding in the projects. And you look at the cash flow profile of the projects and you find this loan is not going to be repaid in the amount of time that we're looking at. How else can we do this? So we seek to help them have the conversations with the O&Ms, the operating and maintenance companies or the asset management companies to say, we will fund this entity if you can give them shareholding in any one of these other 2 companies, so that we can look at the cash flows from those entities to repay, to be added to the project cash flows to be able to repay our loans. So those are that's the type of thinking that we introduce into these projects. So this is just one example that I've given you, but there are other ways in which we can think about it. But this is the role that we are carving for ourselves in this space, to ensure that there is inclusion for women, youth, and Black individuals. Because as Zama also said, that the amount of money that's required in these projects it's ridiculously large for this group of individuals. So how do we help them to participate? And yeah, so this is the niche or the space that we are carving for ourselves in trying to facilitate that inclusion.
And thank you very much for that, because it really does talk to that value chain, look at how do we transform everything, right? Because you're saying, well, if this project that we are backing them in cannot give them the cash flows that are adequate to cover the loan repayment requirements, actually maybe they could become shareholders in a supplier into the IPP project, right? And already you are now starting to insert them in as part of the supply chain. And if you allow yourself to continue to be as creative as you're saying, we actually can come up with very, very robust solutions to making sure that we mainstream women, youth, and people with disabilities across the whole value chain. So that we can start actually also building the capability and hopefully the balance sheets that hopefully one day we're actually working towards achieving. But I'm liking this idea of creativity. I mean, Zama spoke about understanding the role that you can play. So we're any effort too small, we can't write a R1 billion check, but we can certainly de-risk this thing by funding the feasibility study, right? And that's a catalytic role, and so it should never be underplayed just because it's a small check side. Without that check, there's no opportunity for the big thing. And I like what you're saying, Chilizi, to say, look, everybody's here. All the big banks are here. All the DFIs are here, both local and international. So there's no shortage of funding these big projects, but there's nobody who's chasing the funding of Black entrepreneurs, women, youth, and people with disabilities. And that is where we will play. And I think this is the kind of creativity that, again, and then maybe to Zama's point, it talks to who's around the table, because we can only be creative because we've got the technical skills now, but we also come from these people who come to us and say, I'm trying to get funding from your institution and I'm not getting any joy. But because we understand their challenges, we are in a very good space actually around finding a solution. So thank you so much for that. Punki, I think I'm going to bring you in here. When we spoke earlier, I had thought, and I think you agreed, that you would also just share with us some of the things that you as APSA have been doing to not just fund renewable energy projects, but in particular, the intentionality around the inclusion of women, youth, and people with disabilities. Thanks. Over to you, Punki.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Pulu. Before I answer that question, I think I just want to maybe re-emphasize that one point that you aptly made earlier on around just the sheer importance of numeracy and the fact that this is an ecosystem that we are all functioning within. And we obviously have to make sure that in our efforts, we remain as coordinated as we possibly can. And each player within this ecosystem needs to take its part, because, ultimately we'll get to a position where, 1 + 1 is 11, type scenario. So I was just excited just by the idea of, you emphasizing on coordination as well as the importance of numeracy, because without numeracy, I don't think that any of us will be sitting around this table and having this conversation. So thanks a lot, I think, for that point. And then I think from an APSA point of view, we do recognize the fact that we're one of the largest buyers, of goods and services, in the South African environment, and also externally, within the continent, in the markets where we are functioning as a bank. And from our side, we try and use, our purchasing power to support a transformation agenda to a large degree. And then within that, what we do is we do provide preferential rates for projects funded through, the group supplier development initiatives. And then at the same time, I think we use a secured supply and service contract as a basis of funding to ensure, responsible funding, across the board. And then also, I think our preferential procurement program ensures to a large degree that a growing number of small, Black-owned as well as Black female-owned companies supply us with goods and services at the same time. And this, to a degree, it involves the unbundling, of some of the large contracts, because generally what you tend to find is that, there are lots of contracts out there, but most of them, are quite large. And when we contract with some of our suppliers, we actually ask them to unbundle the contract into smaller parcels of work, and thus enabling, I think, emerging, enterprises to participate in the tenders as well. And then I think finally, I just want to say that we also provide development support grants for capacity building for qualifying small enterprises who provide goods and services, across the value chain. So to a large degree, I think for us as an organization, seeing the economy, transform in the markets that we are in, we see that as a significant opportunity, but also it's a must do for us, because we do realize that, we won't exist, without us really contributing positively in the societies and the economies where we are functioning in as a bank. So hopefully, I think, Pulu, that gives you a sense of some of the initiatives that we drive within ABSA to help, fast track and also fast forward this important initiative. Thanks.
Thank you. And bulk breaking, or you call it, what did you call it? Well, I call it bulk breaking. I think you used a different term, but it's the same thing. It actually has proven to be one of the most significant ways of creating opportunities for people. So I think that's really very well done. And thank you for sharing that. And I think it is something that other colleagues can also think about, because I think big business is so used to dealing with other big business that they don't realize that there's an opportunity within their supply chain to create opportunities for smaller business by simply breaking their bulk. Well, Titi, I think let me give you an opportunity just to reflect on the conversation that we've had today. Any thoughts around, or maybe any lessons that you'd like to share with us as DBSA that you have learned over and above what we've already shared, and even some recommendations of what you think we need to be doing going forward?
Thank you so much, Pulu. I think from today's discussions, education is very important. Education in terms of what instruments are out there with the DFIs, with the PIC, that the BE parties, the BWOs, the youth and the persons with disabilities, are able to tap into. Specifically, if I look at the DBSA, we do offer the project preparation facility that Zama, hinted to. It's a technical, assistance facility, but it is meant for people that have done some work in terms of developing a project. So we would not expect you to come and borrow everything. We would look at sweat equity as a part of your own contribution into the development. So education in terms of the tools and instruments, communication, I guess from the DBSA side, we need to communicate more and more often in terms of the instruments that are out there that are available for BE parties, women, youth, and persons with disabilities. The products I've already touched to, but most importantly as well, collaboration, cooperation across, the ministry, the Department of Women, Youth, and Persons with Disabilities, in terms of just showcasing what DFIs, instruments, are out there. I think that would be key for me at this stage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tisi. What I'm hearing you say is that we just don't know what is out there, which talks to the point I was making earlier, that we probably don't have a shortage of resources. We just have a really terrible way of going about doing it. And we need to do better, and I'm really putting it in a very simplistic way, DG, that it's not that there is no, and this is the thing that I personally fundamentally believe it. South Africa is not short of policy. South Africa is really not short of capital. And South Africa is not short of creative solutions. We're just really not very good at showcasing we're not very good at coordinating and collaborating, and we're also then not very good at communicating. And I think it presents us with a great opportunity, Minister, for your department, DG and Minister, of course, for your department to think about what role the department can actually play in doing exactly what Tsitsi is saying. Help gather the necessary information from the different SOEs to say, what are you guys doing for this? And even think about how do you facilitate people's ability to tap into those resources, because for one reason or the other, people also tend to find a challenge with accessing those institutions. And sometimes it's a confidence thing, sometimes it's a language thing, sometimes it's really just lack of understanding. So maybe there is an opportunity to think about that. I'd like to give colleagues 1 minute each an opportunity to make any, last statements that they feel very strongly need to be made. 1 minute, Lungi.
Thank you. Just talking about what is available and what is out there. I mean, like the PIC does have a project development fund. I don't think many people are aware of this. We do early stage funding from 5 to 50 million. Obviously, we are looking at the larger projects, the IPP programs, funding of the community trust. So there's a lot of work that goes into the energy fund that we're currently looking at. And to Tsitsi's point, going at communication, education, people being aware of what is out there and how to utilize it. And finally, women youth need to gather themselves, form very cohesive groups where they can communicate about these issues. I'm part of women's groups in the energy sector. It's a small space and we all know each other. We're able to circulate information amongst ourselves, information around tenders, around jobs, around opportunities, get into these spaces and forcefully make your way in. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Lungi. Punki, any last 30-second input?
Yeah, thanks, Pulu. I think for me, change is fostered by conversations, of this nature. And I would say that, let's be purposeful, on the steps that we are taking from here, to make a meaningful change as we go forward, because beginning of transformation, it starts with the conversation and then it moves into action. So what's key is just action from all of us. And then we can make a meaningful change over time. Thank you.
Thanks, Polo. I'd like to echo Tsitsi's comment around the importance of policy. But even more important is the implementation of policy, because what we come across a lot is, on these big IPP projects where it's government procurement, they'll set targets that, you need to have this much women ownership, this much local content, this much South African ownership. But there is always room for applying for an exemption, to be exempted from meeting those requirements. And that almost hamstrings the funding organizations where, you're looking to push a particular agenda, but if a project is able to apply for an exemption, then your hands are tied. So for me, I think it is the importance of enforcing the policies that are made, because as you said, we've got great policies, great legal frameworks, there's no shortage of that. But I think the enforceability can do with some improvement. Thanks.
Thanks, Tsitsi. I couldn't agree with you more. Sorry, thanks, Chilidzi, because I'm thinking I'm going to give Tsitsi the next chance. Please go ahead, Tsitsi.
Thank you very much. For me, what stood out this afternoon is intentionality. We need to act. We need to implement, we need to educate ourselves, and we need to communicate amongst ourselves. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Agree fully. Zama, your last words.
Thank you, facilitator. I think a lot has been said. I'd like to, on a closing note, just emphasize the need for greater non-financial support. So things like entrepreneurship training and incubation to close the gap that we've identified between who we see sitting from a STEM perspective in those university and high school classes to who we actually end up funding on the other end. And also from a DFI perspective, when an institution with power, utilizing that power to unlock some of the challenges. So own contribution, for example, let us be the ones that negotiate on behalf of our beneficiaries. I use a small example of the NEF where if you look at the petrol stations from a retail perspective, we have agreements with and MOUs with the oil majors to say, actually for the service stations we fund, we will lower those requirements and we'll look to the operational cash flows to pay us back so that we are debunking or breaking down the various barriers and driving the solutions to break down those barriers to create an enabling environment. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, ladies. This has been such a rich conversation. I absolutely enjoyed it. And I think, DG, for me, what is very, very clear is that we want to move away from the rhetoric of, what the policies are saying, what the targets are, to implementation. And you've got people around the table who are saying, let us be intentional, let us talk, let us have conversations. And those conversations will lead to action. And I think there's a very clear need for a coordinating role, not a cumbersome role where we've got long meetings about nothing, but really where we've got discussions around, okay, today this is the problem we're trying to solve, and we walk out of that meeting with a very clear action plan on how we're going to solve that problem. Because we are tired of talking, we are tired of sitting around the table and negotiating. We're very good at that. We've proven it for the past 27 years. Now we are saying it's time for action, DG, and let us collaborate and let us continue to engage. Thank you very much, ladies. You are absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed you, and I hope you have the rest of a good evening today.